Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us here on the Simply Trade podcast. We have a episode today. So a couple of weeks ago, I was invited to attend a conference that I've never attended, and kind of eye-opening experience for me in the sense that I really like all the different conferences that I go to. They're all very unique. They all have different perspectives, different views, but I've never been to one where you're kind of like eye-opening in the sense that, holy smokes, man, they're taking it to the next level. So I'm talking about the ATCC conference put together by Deleon Trade. So that's the Advanced Topic in Customs Compliance Conference. And it was really neat in that the people that attend and all that, it's really cool how you feel like maybe you've seen it all when you go to other conferences, but then you attend this one and then you get that perspective as to, oh, there is more, like they say. I think it was Steve Jobs that used to like to say that, he did his pitch and he showed you the gadget and he would say, but there's more, so that's what it is. And so I was thinking that every team, every industry, everybody has what is called the A team. The cliche of that show, the A team. With Mr. T and all that. So in trade, we have the A team here also, the advanced team. It's our advanced team. So we have the A team. We have Cindy DeLeon on our show today, and she brought along Mr. John Metrich. And hopefully I did not butcher that, John. I'm sorry, John Metrich.
Perfect. Yep, perfect.
Awesome. Good. So welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me. And we have a really cool advanced topic that we want to talk about here today. But thank you for joining. Anything just to give us a quick overview and a snapshot of either one of you or both of you, and then like what you all are doing.
Yeah, well, first of all, Lalo, thank you. Thank you to you and to your team and to the Simply Trade podcast. John, thank God you joined because how could we be the 18 with it just being me? And that's kind of what I always say is that I get way too much credit for what Deleon Trade does, and that's why I just insisted that John participate in this podcast today because I am certainly nothing without our team. And John is right there at the top of the leadership of our team and has helped me just really put together this great group of people. And thank you for the comments on ATCC. We're just so happy with how it's turned out. And we just thank all of our speakers and our sponsors because that's really what makes ATCC so amazing is just the willingness of our speakers to just give all of that knowledge, all of that practical guidance, the technical guidance to our attendees and just having a really select group of attendees that are ready for that advanced level content because not everybody is early on in their career and that are ready to consume and to process that information. And we're really just happy with how it turned out and so glad you guys could make it at Simply Trade and at Global Training Center because you guys love training and education as well.
Right. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, John.
Well, it's nice. It's nice being on the podcast. Thanks so much for having us on. And like Cindy said, thanks so much for your kind words about ATCC. We're really excited to have, trade professionals there in a large group and really educate, in a deep dive level, some advanced topics. So we're really excited to have, importers and brokers and attorneys and everyone there. It's one of the highlights of our year, getting to see everybody and really share some of the stories and trials that everybody went through in 2025.
Yes, exactly. And so today we're going to talk about Section 232 tariffs, and this is not a basics conversation, like I said before. But before we do that, little known secret about our podcast. Somewhere in our disclaimers, in other words, if you listen to our show, you're agreeing to this disclaimer. That is, we do not provide any legal advice. Please be aware of that. This is for A, educational purposes, B, informational purposes, and C, in many cases, entertainment purposes. And so you just never know what you get, but it's not legal advice. Please go out and ask for legal advice. Engage the folks from Deleon Trade, or if you need an attorney, engage them in a contract because you do want that information privilege. And so anyway, with that out of the way, I just kind of wanted to make sure that we all understood that. But Cindy, let's start with you. Let's kind of just talk about just 232 for right now. I guess they just ruled on the IEEPA tariffs that President Trump did not have authority. And I'm going to leave it at that because I'm sure we're going to have many, many podcasts on that. So anyway, because of that, 232 may have some more significant meaning or value to the president and more tools and weapons for him for tariffs. But in preparing for this, we thought, okay, let's talk about, setting the stage and everything. I mean, just kind of curious, Cindy, like what, if anything, like what do you feel like with Section 232, like the content calculations and everything, what is our current state? Where are we right now?
As far as 232 goes, we can't now not include the elephant in the room, which is Section 122. So I'm going to kind of lay out where we are with 232, but then we still kind of have to now say, okay, well, how does any of this change because of 122? So when 232 came out, and really we're talking about steel, aluminum, copper, primarily here, okay? The understanding was a couple of things. In the original proclamation issued by the president, which was Proclamation 9980, there was a little blurb in there about saying that a derivative product meant a product that had 2/3 metal content, right? So we originally thought that there would be some materiality threshold built into determining whether a good would even be subject to 232. And based on the more recent proclamation, which was issued in February of last year, they're really that language, that 2/3 metal content language went away. And that's a really important distinction to make because it really opened this area of ambiguity of what is subject to the 232 derivative duties, and then also how you calculate the metal content. And so originally, I think based on the proclamation, based on all the legal guidance given by the government, the trade walked away with the understanding that metal content was, guess what? Metal content. Call me crazy, call me simple-minded, but that you would look at an article, that you would go to its raw materials or its bill of material, and you would identify those materials that contain the subject metal, steel, aluminum, copper in this case, and that you would tally up those costs, and that's what you would declare and pay 232 on. And here we're talking about derivative articles. We're going to leave fully steel, fully aluminum articles for our discussion for another day. And what happened was CBP started taking enforcement actions and started issuing CF28 requests for information, eventually CF29 notices of action and denials of post-summary corrections, taking the position that steel and aluminum and copper content did not just mean the content. They went all the way to the other spectrum, and they said, really, you got to pay 232 on the entire value of the article minus component costs, or we'll call it material costs, that are not metal, that are not steel, aluminum, copper, which was a huge shift. And so we have FAQs on 232 saying one thing. The base metals C issued 28s and 29s kind of and made determinations completely to the opposite spectrum. And then they came in and issued guidance to the trade community. And that guidance was issued in January 15th, 2026. It's been posted widely on LinkedIn. If you haven't seen it, connect with me on LinkedIn and you'll see it there. And then they issued updated guidance in February of this year. Okay. But then guess what? Now we got just recently an informal email from the base metal C assistant, from the base metal C, also giving us guidance that says you are to take all the value adds and prorate them amongst metal and non-metal, which again is a deviation. One of the things that I really love about being a member of the American Association of Exporters and Importers, and I hope it's okay if I talk about them here a little bit.
That's fine.
Yeah. I'm really involved with the American Association of Exporters and Importers. I know a lot of you out there aren't. You should look it up. But the AAEI had a subcommittee, which I was a part of, and they put together an amazing letter, which I've posted on my LinkedIn page, just going through, hey, Customs and Department of Commerce, look, we've now gotten proclamations, we've gotten FAQs, we've gotten base metal C guidance 1, 2, and 3, and none of these things coincide. So please please help us understand what is going on and what you are wanting the trade to calculate as true metal guidance. And the beauty of AAEI is we didn't just say, hey, customs, what do you want us to do? We kind of said, this is what we think is the right answer, which was really cool being part of that group. And a shout out to all the committee members there. But we went there and we said, we really are trying to get it back to metal content. And so this is all still in a state of flux. That letter went to Department of Commerce BIS on February 19th.
Yes.
2026. And so we're really hoping for some guidance. So now the last thing I'll say really quick, Lalo, is in comes, the Supreme Court decision on IEPA. In comes the president's proclamation on Section 122. So now we're going into this decision on metal content with a little bit different of a position with the government, because the government just lost a ton of duties on IEPA. We've now gone to only a 15% tariff under Section 122. So how lenient will this new decision and the imposition of Section 122 have a negative impact on how much the government wants to work with us on Section 122, on Section 232 metal value content?
Awesome. So you just said a lot of things of like lots of confusion and still unsettled things, right? I mean, because of not confusion so much as like where or what might still be, the best way or the proper way of handling this. I mean, do you think that confusion is like, is it regulatory? Is it operational? Is it enforcement? I mean, what do you feel is the main confusion, or is it all three?
Well, I think it's really caused by lack of conciseness from a regulatory standpoint. I think that the trade community is awesome. When you're in customs, and I spent 12 years of my career at customs, and you think a certain way about trade. When you come out to this side, I think in the government sometimes we just think that there are a bunch of bad actors out there. And when you come to this side and you see how much this trade community is working so hard to be compliant, and without clear and concise guidelines, they can't really be compliant. And so I think it's all starts with regulatory and policy and guidance. And then because there is a lack thereof, you have a disconnect between regulatory and enforcement, right? And then that comes to the trade and the operational. Well, how can they get it right if they don't know what right means? So to me, it all starts at the top.
Exactly. Yeah. So switching over to the, I guess the enforcement side, both of you were former auditors with CBP. You were on the other side of you just said that, Cindy, now you're realizing the other side of the coin. Let's say, you're no longer at CBP and you realize how great this community is. And it's funny that you say that, because even at your conference, could have had two competitors sitting next to each other, but they're collaborating, they're talking to each other and they're helping each other. That happens pretty much in the whole trade community, which is really great. But John, so let me ask you to put back your auditor hat back on. And then let me ask you this. So like, if you were auditing today, what report do you feel, or what would you request to get this started?
I think, CBP always sort of tries to tackle this from a risk-based perspective, right? And we kind of saw it, like, if you could go back 2 years, we saw CBP really emphasize Section 301 exclusions. They really hammered that in the industry. There's 28s, 29s investigations, and then there was a lot on the 232 exclusions as well. Now, what I think they're going to be focusing on 2025, which we've already started with 28s and 29s, we've started to see it. It's really on the 232 metal content. And I think they're going to be focusing on those that have the widest disparity between, metal valuation and non-metal valuation, right? So in 2025, you had lots of companies that, this happens so fast. They're filing entries and paying, for example, 232 on the full value of the article, right? Because they have no information to do anything else. They don't know what the non-metal content was. Like, this just came out. Like, what are we going to do, right? We have to pay it now, but maybe we'll file a PSC or a protest or something after the fact and correct our value, right? And so you have a lot of companies that then shift from paying the full 232 on the full value of the article, and now they're paying it on only a portion of the article using one of the methodologies that Cindy kind of talked about, right? There's some disparity on what's actually correct or not, but maybe they're paying now 232 on 10% of the article's value, right? Instead of 100%. They file a PSC, you got to submit your documentation to customs. That's where CBP is going to be focusing on those that pay the least, right? Especially when you're talking about a Chapter 73 article, that when we're talking about derivatives, right, under Chapter 73, a lot of those tariff numbers are mostly steel, right? There's not a lot of other things on them. And so when you're going from paying duties on 100% to only 10%, or even filing your original entry on only 10%, and paying 232 on 10% of the article, as an example, that's where CBP is going to be looking at. And they can leverage ACE data, and they can leverage it industry wide too. They can look at every derivative tariff number, look at all the importers' activity, and really start to focus on, okay, who is paying the least amount by tariff number. They can do that from an industry ranking, start sending CF28s, start sending CF29s if they have enough information. They may even start, using that to determine who's a good audit candidate, right? And then even maybe start an investigation.
You just named a few red flags there. Sudden shifts in declared value, right? I guess that they're lower values and all that. I mean, I guess I'm just trying to see or convey to the audience, what do they see? Like, what could they probably possibly prepare for? Like, what red flags CBP might see that may trigger some kind of either audit or further investigation, that may get them in trouble. So maybe they can preempt that or put procedures in place that might help them.
Okay, yeah, I think there's really two parts to that. One is from a data perspective.
Right.
If you've gone from, 232 valuation being 100% to some lesser amount, CBP is going to be able to see that in the data. You're going down to 50%, 20%, 10%. Like, March 12th was a big day for 232, right? Before that, they were declaring so much in value. And then after that, it goes way down. That's one way they can tell. And then on PSCs, right, they can see, because basically a PSC has to be reviewed by an import specialist, and they could see on that entry how far the value is going down, and if it even makes sense for that article, right? And that's one thing they could look at.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I mean, here we are talking about all of this and the information that or the data, let's call it, that their folks are collecting. And I guess this is also a plug for, as much as we hate to say it, but we had actually an episode recently where our gals from Julie and Renee, they do tips every Tuesday, and they're on their automation series, quote unquote, their automation series. And now today they're saying, now more than ever, forget about, I'm automating, and all you're using is really an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. It's way beyond that now. It's more where you do need a dedicated, for sure, ERP. I mean, whoever, that's standard, or it should be standard. But GTM system, one that specializes and connects to or speaks to or somehow interfaces to that ERP to do the trade stuff. So I can see how that is very important. But so let me ask you, from everything that we're talking about right now, and either one of you may be able to comment on this, because I know, Cindy, I'm going to throw a little bit of a USMCA twist here on this, but
Oh, I
I know
love it.
this has nothing to do with USMCA in the sense that, I mean, I'm not saying it has nothing to do with it, but what I'm trying to say, procedurally or tactically, do you see kind of like this where folks should be managing it almost a little bit like USMCA or any free trade agreement, where you go down to the supplier, the BOM, you got to break that down if you're going to do any free trade agreement, especially
Sure.
USMCA. And so
Sure.
same thing, right? Instead of values, now we're talking about metal and all these
So
materials.
so let's talk about that. So I think a better way of phrasing that question is like, how do you calculate the 232 metal content? Right. So if we talk about that, obviously we have this open question, right? Of how does the government want us to calculate 232 metal content? But I think here my response is going to talk about evidence. And one of the proposals that the COAC made and AAEI made was to allow companies to calculate metal content using weights So weights of materials on their bill of material, and then industry benchmarks or indices for steel costing, for steel valuation. Because in real life, customs may think that, importers can get access to all this information and it's readily available. And that's not really true in real life. I think really your supplier, sometimes even related party suppliers, don't want to give you their costing information, honestly, much less proof of payment from your tier one supplier to its tier two supplier for steel. Let's stick on steel for a second. And so if customs comes out and says using weights and using industry benchmarks or indices for steel costing or for metal costing is acceptable, then that's going to be one thing. You'll still need a bill of material and you'll need accurate weights for those component costs and for those component articles, and you'll be able to calculate things that way, right? If we go towards a more true costing model based on the government's guidance, then it'll also be a bill of material. And there's so much. I love USMCA, Lalo, and you and I are going to do some fun things together in the area of USMCA. But I did a 3-hour workshop at
Yes.
ATCC on USMCA by myself with 7 case studies. Everybody literally had to do tariff shifts and RVC and VNM and all this stuff. So I think that there are so many things that can be said about how you do that and get it right. A lot of people get a bill of material and they're like, okay, great, let me just run with that. I mean, it's like saying, here's a check for $1 million and let me just run with that. Well, what if it's not signed? Or what if the pay to party is not you? You know what I mean? You can't just run with a bill of material. You got to make sure and vet it. And that's a whole nother session for another day. And maybe I do a session with you, Lalo, on just vetting a bill of material. But I just think the evidence is going to be very clear, as well as CBP and Department of Commerce provide guidance on what is going to be the proper way of calculating. And it's going to probably be bills of material costing information, and then, payment on raw materials or weights and industry benchmarks. I think all that's going to be important. And then how you prorate things is going to be important. If the answer ends up being kind of where it sits right now, wouldn't you say, John, it sits right now because this is that third last final guidance talked about prorating? I think it's going to be metal content, non-metal content, and then you take your value add here in the middle and you prorate it amongst metal and non-metal, and then those two things together will be 232 applicable. The actual metal content cost itself plus the prorated value added costs that are prorated to the metal content. I told you guys this was going to be advanced. I don't do basic training. I don't. There are plenty of places that do that. So if you're listening to me on any kind of podcast or webinar, I know I have all my fun fans out there that love the deep dives into some of these calculations.
And that's the title, the A Team. Okay, so I hopefully I'm the first one that coined it. Okay, so I wanna.
Thank you. I love it. I used to watch that show all the time. I'll just tell you, so it's perfect.
Yeah, same here. So, John, do you feel like? I mean, let's go back to the data. Do you feel that maybe once there's that guidance or once there's more clarity, like, do you feel? Now, I wanted to ask, do you think companies are overcomplicating this? The calculations and then calculating metal content and all that, but I mean, maybe not because there's no clarity, but do you feel it could be easier or simpler? I mean, a clearer path. Of course, we just talked about all the different methods and everything that Cindy talked about, but I guess I'm just wondering, companies that throw their arms up in the air and they're like, "Nah, I'm just gonna roll the dice and declare whatever." Do you think they're just giving up too early?
Well, I think in terms of complicating it, I think the government complicated it,
Yes.
right? Like the importers, they're just stuck at the mercy of the complicated nature of the way this is rolled out, right? And you know, once guidance comes out, it'll be interesting, like formal guidance, right? Not like a random email here and there. Once formal guidance comes out, it'll be interesting to see how CBP applies that historically, right? Because if I go back to, June of last year, right, when they kind of got into the breakouts of the metal content and all that, like I could probably come up with like 20 different ways that importers have claimed the metal content since then, right? And and they're not all the same. And depending on how CBP administers the guidance and how they go back and apply it will be very interesting. Because we've seen now in 28 responses, we've seen CBP have some flexibility depending on which C is actually looking at it. Whereas the base metal C had kind of had their stance. You had other C's of like production equipment and others that kind of take a different stance on it. And what they allowed from a CF documentation standpoint was different. And now if we do get some universal appropriate guidance, what is going to be CBP's administering of that going back historically? That'll prove to be very interesting.
And okay, so with regards to enforcement, do you see the signaling from CBP coming through like guidance or through auditing?
I think right now we're seeing 28s and 29s. We're getting a lot of, we're seeing like, with 28s, you have time to respond. CBP can evaluate, right, and determine if they want to do a 29. Sometimes we're getting those CF29s with proposed action, right? And then making you prove it. So your window's shorter. Your window's not 30 days, your window's 20 days, and CBP's already ready to take action. So it kind of puts importers a little bit at a disadvantage in that regard. Based on those 28s and 29s and what CBP is seeing in the industry, as well as looking at it from an aggregate analysis of ACE data, they are going to move into the audit phase. I guarantee they will be doing audits of 232 valuation content especially because IEPA went away, right? So what of all the tariffs that have been coming in is mostly 232 now. So that is where they're going to be focusing, and they're going to be audits in that regard. It's just a matter of what criteria they're going to be using to support that. It's going to be interesting. And I think one of the things that what I try to tell everyone is like, no matter what methodology you used, you have to be able to substantiate it and back it up. So many companies just kind of did like, CBP knows there's bad actors out there and they know there's a lot of good actors too. You have a lot of companies that did whatever they could in the flurry and frenzy of activity that happened in 2025 to make it work, right? Now it's going to be, can you support and document and prove with an audit trail what valuations you used?
Okay, that's real interesting. So, I mean, I guess it's definitely not something. Well, I shouldn't say it's not new because I mean, obviously, it was introduced or not introduced, but heavily publicized. I guess back in Trump one, back when he first became president the first time around, he started using 232. Biden kept him going and all that, and it's just now there's a little bit of a pivot, because of the derivatives and the way that's being calculated. Whereas you thought, for example, this pen had no metal. I mean, had nothing with a metal or anything, but because it does have metal pieces, I mean that now we have to worry about it a little bit. But I guess in closing or in trying to wrap this whole thing up, what do you all feel? Where do you feel, or how do you feel that it would be for a company to, let's call them to be audit ready? Like, is it all in the data? Is it like strategic? I mean, that kind of stuff. So,
I think I would really like to close with the recommendation to the trade to be strategic and to look at things holistically. That's my new favorite word. Anik was giving me a hard time at ATCC because she's like, well, she wasn't actually giving me a hard time. She was like, I love that word. And it's become my favorite word for this year, is that you have to look at this things holistically and strategically, because some importers were issued a 28 on steel content. They responded. Customs didn't agree with their calculation, issued a 29, issued a bill, which they had to pay. But now, if new guidance comes out making how the importer originally entered the goods under 232 correct, they might be able to get some of that money back via protest. I think you really need to stay on top of this, be very well connected to trade organizations, the trade organizations that are out there, and all the people that spend their volunteer time working on all these different issues for the benefit of trade is so important. And I just thank all of those hardworking committees and all of the trade associations out there and broker associations, both at the national level and at the local levels. They're doing such a great job, and you really need to stay connected and plugged in. When it comes to evidence, from a former customs auditor's perspective, and I'm sure John would agree, every auditor is trained the same way: follow the money, follow the money. And so to me, I always tell clients, bills of material, proofs of payment, invoices. And what makes an invoice real is there's money exchanging hands for the amount captured on that invoice. And so when you look at a bill of material and you look at a full cost breakdown, which includes material, labor, overhead, material variances, all these different things, you really need to look at, do all those total the entered value, including once you add profit? Do they match the entered value? If you have an entered value of $1,000, but somebody gives you a bill of material with just the material cost at 1,500, it's like something's wrong here, right? So I just think that it's very important for the information to be auditable, that you have evidence, that you're able to trace and tick and tie information. That's what auditors are trained to do. They're trained to trace, they're trained to follow the money, and they're trained to protect the revenue of the U.S. government. Every auditor at CBP takes an oath when they start. I remember when I took my oath, John. You probably remember when you took yours, and you literally take an oath that you are going to protect the revenue of U.S. Customs and Border
Mhm.
Protection, U.S. Customs Service back in the day when I started customs. But now I think that's the beauty of being on this side. I love when you're at customs, all you can do is tell an importer you're doing it wrong or you're not, right? You're doing it wrong and this is how much money you owe customs. The beauty of being a trade consultant now is being able to help companies get it right, to design programs, policies, and procedures based on the 5 components of internal control, to help companies get it right. I would say make sure you have your evidence, make sure you have a very strong systemic way of capturing the information based on the 5 components of internal control, have written policies and procedures, and then go back in and make sure you execute the monitoring component of internal control to make sure that, hey, your well-designed policies and procedures and your systemic control activities are actually being followed exactly how they should be. And then I think that's going to put you in the best audit ready stance in the event customs comes. And it also puts you in a best, and to protect your company's revenue. You made a comment about GTM software. I'm a huge software fan. You know that, Lalo.
Right.
We actually have great relationships with a lot of the software companies out there. And I think companies who are falling behind the 8 ball and forget about AI for a second, just, data management without even the assumptions that take place using AI, just the ability to process and manage data, being able to have your information down at a SKU level is is basically essential these days. So definitely make sure that you're staying up to speed with your technology.
And this makes sense also. We always like to preach, I call it preaching here at Global Training Center. We like to preach that trade compliance is a corporate culture and not just it's no longer a silo there with just the trade folks. So if let me ask you this, if you were engaging with a client and they may be asking you about this or maybe something similar along the lines of this, would you all insist that maybe even like the CFO is there in the meeting instead of like, whereas before they the CFO may or may not be important, whereas now I think they're very strategic to this, don't you think?
John and I are smirking. To all the C-suite folks out there, learn about trade. Learn about trade. Don't just squeeze your trade compliance professionals. Learn about trade because there are things that you can do and there are things that you can't do. And I think they are trying to learn about trade. I would have a savvy C suite professional in a meeting like that on a GTM software pitch, definitely. I actually did a speech at AAEI with the chief compliance officer of a major company that manufactures rail cars
Hmm.
and just all types of railway products. And because he has learned about trade, because he has spent the time to get up to speed, he is an absolute asset, not only to his company's bottom line, but also to the execution of trade compliance activities and making sure his trade team feels supported and that his trade team is able to do their job. But a CFO that just wants to like demand that money not be spent or duties not be paid without understanding trade, yeah, not helpful.
Okay. So, in closing, I guess just real quick, where can we catch up to you guys soon in person? Are you all heading? What conferences are you heading to? What do you recommend people going to, like anything here in the near future? I suspect
Yeah.
which ones, but go ahead and pitch away.
So our Deleon Trade fun-loving A-team contingent will be at the CBP Trade Cargo and Security Summit, coming up in Dallas. We will also be at the GTE conference coming up later this year. We will be at AAEI, of course, Trade Day. We would definitely be there. Definitely wouldn't miss that one. I'll be at the Southern Border Broker Conference later this year in October. If you've never attended a Southern Border Conference, those are actually amazing and really fun. I think it's going to be in Laredo this year. I love Laredo. Yes, I said I love Laredo. I really do. If you haven't been there, you just don't even understand. And then, John, did I miss any? Did I miss?
No, I think that covers the majority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So just so everyone knows, we'll put links on our show notes for all of these in the order that Cindy was talking about. The CBP event in Dallas is late April. GTE conference by the NEI, or the NCBFA Education Institute, is in late July, I believe, this year in St. Louis. And then AEI is in between that, I believe, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
it's in
anyway.
June.
It's in June, right? It's in
Yes.
June in DC. But yeah, there's a lot of cool events that we can all hit up. And, with all these things changing these days, there's going to be a lot of information that we need to catch up on. But John, Cindy, thank you so much for joining me. Hopefully, if anyone is listening and want to level up their compliance or understand a little bit more of just the basics. We hear 232, we hear 122, we hear all of that. And if you want to go beyond just the understanding of it and be more strategic about it, don't hesitate to hit up Deleon Trade. But thank you all for joining us, and we hope to catch up to you all here soon at an event or through the podcast.
Love
Thank
it.
you so much.
Thanks for having us, Lalo.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.
Uh-huh.